It's time for the second part of my conversation with Reverend Jeff Bowman of Temple United Methodist Church on the topic of letting go as a spiritual message for us right now. Also the title of a book by Richard Rohr, but we're not about pushing a particular author. We're really about pushing Jesus and pushing a deeper connection between ourselves and our Savior, our Lord, our friend, our teacher. I assure you, it's worth listening in. Thanks for being here.
One of Rohr's big go-to catchphrases is include and transform. And that comes out of this whole universal pattern: order, disorder, reorder. Go back to creation, then you got chaos. But we would say in the church, life, death, resurrection. Everything, as soon as we include it, we never get rid of it. So my pain, I'm never absolutely rid of it. I just transcend it. I include it and transcend it. I move spiritually beyond it. I didn't let it stop me right there, which is kind of what Jesus is saying to, I just got they hit me there that Peter's trying to stop Jesus. No. You're not going to do this.
Yeah.
Peter can't include the suffering of the one that he loves, so he can't grow.
I am reminded of a book by a professor I had in seminary, James Loder. It's called The Transforming Moment. And what he says is basically, here's what happens in your life as a person trying to grow in faith, in spirit, whatever. It's not a matter of reach, the second floor and then stay there. And then reach the third floor and stay there, as if we were somehow, taking an elevator spiritually easily to the next level. He says what really seems to happen that makes a difference in people's lives is not being on the second floor or the third floor or whatever number of floors you'd like, but it's actually the process of getting to the next level. And he describes that process in terms of equilibrium, that you've got equilibrium right now in your life, and things make sense. You've got them figured out. You have the skills required to live in the world that you have been living in. And then something comes along and shakes you and messes up your equilibrium totally. And then you've got, many people will say, I'm not there. This is not troubling me. I'm just going to be in denial about this. I want to stay on the level where things make sense to me. I'm going to stay here and hang on to this. And probably you end up with, all kinds of psychic trouble, because you are, having a, what do you call it, when you got two thoughts going on that are in conflict with each other and you're not dealing with it. But he said that process of being out of equilibrium is the thing that forces you to examine your foundations, to re-examine your faith, your thought, your life, your priorities, and that's the only way that we advance spiritually, by allowing ourselves to be off balance. And then you can establish a new equilibrium that takes into account the thing that knocked us off balance in the first place. And the great thing is, Jesus does not say, Peter, you're fired.
Right.
You're not out of here. I mean, he gives them hell, Get behind me, Satan. I mean, nobody wants Jesus to be saying this kind of thing to you.
Right.
It's hard. It messes with him. And yet he said, but Peter, stays
Right.
because he knows something here. I have to. It's like the disciples say to Jesus when he says to them, and it's starting to get harder for everyone in the crowd. And Jesus turns to his sort of in crowd and says, well, are you going to leave me too? And they say, where else will we go? You
Right.
have the words of life. And we don't understand them, but something in us just knows this is the words of life. This is truth you're giving us. And even if we can't understand it, and sometimes we can't stand it, still, it is clearly the path that leads to life. And I guess I really want to invite people onto the path that leads to life. Invite people along toward what God has in mind.
I love that. You're right where there's the saying, I think if I get it right, if you never learn to die, you'll never learn to live. That we need to life comes out of those deaths. And yet suffering is the one thing that we don't understand. It's kind of the mystery of why do people suffer? Why does God allow people to suffer? But it is that variable. Like I said, we can't explain it, but we know that when we experience it, something comes out of it. Like you said, can Peter bear to do this? But something in him says, don't give up on this guy. And God's love transcended, included Peter, despite his denial, despite his resistance. And through Peter's pain was birthed this light. Oh, he is the Messiah.
It is tough to be a pastor knowing that we are just folks struggling with this stuff as much as anyone else, and yet having a responsibility to call people on to whatever's next for them, to call people forward to something that we don't, haven't mastered. It's okay to be a math teacher for fourth graders. When there's an absolute answer and there's a truth, and we can help people make sense of it. But in a way, we're trying to say to everybody, we don't get it, and I don't think you're supposed to.
Right.
In some way.
Right.
It remains mysterious.
We resist it, like you said. We've seen it demonstrate all over this country in the last year between pandemic and deaths, Black Lives Movement, Me Too movements, all these movements. And we haven't lamented. We haven't come into, as Americans, in solidarity, because we're busy blaming the other person for why we're suffering in the world. Mm-hmm. If I listen to your suffering and I hear what you're suffering from, if I stand in solidarity with that, it might cost something of me. Those who lose their life will find it. And we're still counting the cost and finding a way to transmit our pain to others versus being able to own it and learn from it, or to see God in it.
So there's our struggle for Lent. There's our challenge for Lent, to work on seeing God in the ways we haven't before, and to realize that the seeing is something in me that I have to open up to the suffering, open up to life, so that I can have this new thing that I don't understand. It's like persuading a third grader that you really need calculus. We're not ready for it.
It is that mystery, and what I've learned from the mystics. What's helpful is developing this non-dual mindset. That we're just built to function in this duality, this binary thinking, pain and good health, black and white, up and down. So how do we even rationalize that we suffer if it's not in the same? It's the opposite of what we're thinking. It's at the other end of good health and suffering, prosperity and bad things. How do we join those two together and see them as the same? I mean, our brains don't normally do that. It's like we
No.
just have to embody that, and the world sees it through our, solidarity with others, our empathy, our forgiveness.
Hmm.
And in that way, we become, in many ways, a crucifix. And
Mm.
and dying to those things is where we let go and actually put our finger in the wound, because it is the death that Jesus died. It feels like I'm dying by doing it. It's painful. I can't let go of that. But we look at the cross, we look at him hanging there and going, in order to let go of this suffering, I feel just like him.
Hmm.
Um, because all that I think I am is fighting to the end. And this isn't going merrily down the road. It's somebody's pinned me to the wall, and this is painful and deadly. But yet, once we get it, then we begin to see the walking wounded, because we began to own our own wounds and see our wounds in others. We see Christ's wound in us. The battle for suffering diminishes a little bit. Everybody knows suffering right now in some capacity, and to help them discern why. What is it about suffering? Uh, am I owning my own suffering, or am I just transmitting it, putting it on other people, or at least to recognize it in the world as we go into this Lenten season, that we're following Jesus on this road where suffering is front to us. We're putting ashes on our head.
Hmm.
Wow, there's this huge need for lament and quit blaming, and just, it is what it is. Um, we can almost suffer by hearing the words in the imposition of ashes. They scare us. From dust you come, to dust you shall return. Well, what do you mean? I'm going on a new life, not without a whole lot of suffering. You're not going to make the new life until you actually die, and we'll have all these little deaths along the way.
We don't want to imagine that a funeral should just be a party. I think that's kind of taking that to a foolish place a little bit. I think
Mm-hmm.
grieving is entirely appropriate, because that, in a way, that denies the suffering, like Peter. Well, no,
Sure.
there's no suffering here. This is simply something good, something moving on to glory. But if we don't grieve, we're not real. And we're not taking
Exactly.
the suffering into ourselves and making it part of our humanity.
Gosh, you're a mystic, brother. That's where I was just going. There is only one suffering in the world. It's God. There are forms of it, but when we own ours, when we grieve it, when we retain it, then when I go to the funeral, the very things that I'm seeing, the suffering I'm seeing there, is my suffering. That loss of that friend is reminding me of my suffering when I have to lose something,
Mm-hmm.
or when perhaps I'm going through something that someone else is suffering. We begin to recognize it. Not that we become friends with it, but we begin to let go of the mindset that I shouldn't be suffering, that ascent upward versus a descent down to my basic humanity. And why should I be exempt from suffering? I follow Jesus. I say the right prayers. I do the right things. I go to church every Sunday. I don't know why this is happening to me. Until we get rid of that mindset.
Yeah, until we get rid of that mindset, we cannot become followers of Christ.
Right.
We aren't picking up our cross and following him to say, yeah, I accept crucifixion coming my way. I accept suffering coming my way because I have a cheap answer and I say, well, life is on the other side of it. Not so simple, but because I know that it is all blessed, all surrounded, all imbued with life. And on we go with the.
And as long as that, Merton referred to it as the true self, false self, ego self. As long as that's in charge, we never really get there because that is the death in us, the death of between who we think we really are, which doesn't exist at all, and who we really are that will die, that will suffer. When we start living out of that true self sometime, we can see the games that the ego self is up to.
Yes,
Aha, you did it again, Jeff. You did it. There you go. You did it again. What a silly program I'm running. But it's all not for the glory of God. It's all for the preservation of who I think I am.
mm-hmm.
Father Gregory Boyle from Homeboy Ministries in Los Angeles, apropos to what we were talking about, he says so many people think that, in service to God, they're going to go to the margins and they're going to live on the margins and they're going to fix and save people. He said, I've done more funerals for homeboys. We don't go to the margins to fix and save people. We go to the margins to be transformed ourselves. I'm like, wow. So why am I here? Why am I in the mission field? Not to fix you. And it kind of goes what we were talking about. Those who lose their life. Well, no, I'm going to find our life, the life of my congregation. I'm going and I'm going to go save everybody and start this great ministry.
I know it took me a long time, and I'm not sure I'm there yet, but a long time to start moving past the ego of a pastor that I want to accomplish, that I want to succeed. I want to make the church grow. People wouldn't think about going to North Muskegon to minister to the homeboys. It's a different kind of neighborhood. We're trying to remember that we're connected more broadly than this. But there's a profound spiritual need among people who are surrounded by stuff, just like everybody else. All right. Well, friend, I think we've said a lot. We've said enough to keep people's spirits busy for a long time.